Glory, America, bonjour, hi, Canada. Hugh Hewitt inside the Beltway on a day of bad and good news, a lot of news. Let's start with the bad news. Terrorists have fired 200 rockets at Israel in the last 24 hours from Gaza. The Israeli Defense Forces responded with 130 strikes, and it's on the brink of war in Israel. That came on fairly quickly, but it is coming on. Palestinian terrorist groups in the Gaza Strip fired a massive barrage of rockets at the southern city of Ashkelon at dawn on Tuesday, wounding 6 people, threatening to turn the city into hell. The assault came after a night of almost constant rocket fire on Israeli communities near the Gaza Strip, as the Israeli Defense Forces conducted strikes on more than 100 targets in the coastal enclave as part of what it is called Operation Guarding the Walls, the military said. The previous day saw a major outbreak of violence from Gaza, including rare rocket fire on Jerusalem, where Palestinians have been clashing with police for days. According to Gaza's Hamas-run health ministry, at least 23 people on the Gaza Strip were killed on Monday night and Tuesday morning, including 9 minors. Another 107 Palestinians were injured to varying degrees, the ministry said. The IDF said at least 15 of those killed were members of the Hamas terrorist group who were launching rockets or anti-tank guided missiles at Israel. IDF spokesperson Hadai Zilberman said a number of those killed in Gaza, at least 3, were hit by errant rockets fired by Palestinian terrorists, not Israeli airstrikes. They were taking steps, per usual, to avoid civilian casualties, but Hamas does hide among civilian population centers. It always happens this way. Asked about the potential for a ground invasion or targeted killing of top terrorist commanders, Zilberman said the military was, quote, prepared for anything. Watch that space throughout the day today. That's the bad news. Israel will defend itself. We stand with Israel. Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor to President Biden, called his counterpart in Israel, and his counterpart in Israel said, why don't you call the guys in Gaza? And so Jake Sullivan did. I think Jake Sullivan's pretty sound on Israel. I'm not too sure about John Kerry or others within the Biden administration. And Joe Biden has always talked the talk but never walked the walk on Israel. Remember, he was vice president for 8 years. They did not move the embassy. And they've upended the peace process, the Abraham Accords, completely, stalling it out by going back to Iran with their begging bowl. So that's a disaster. Let me get to the good news. Glenn Youngkin won. Glenn Youngkin is the GOP nominee for governor, fairly handily, 54 to 44%, over the second place finisher, Pete Snyder. They used rank voting in Virginia. So they kept voting. If you voted for one of the 7 candidates and your candidate didn't win, they went to your second choice. And they added that to either Glenn Youngkin or somebody else, and then they eliminated that person who came in last. And that took forever, hand counting, and it was a screwed up process, and they should throw that away and go to a straight primary so we don't have any screw ups. Remember, I talked about Glenn Youngkin for weeks, had him on the show, registered to vote, went to vote. I wasn't on the list. Neither was the fetching Mrs. Hewitt, who registered at a different time. So obviously there's some glitches in this, quote, disassembled convention. It's a dumb system. Go to a primary, Virginia. Luckily, Glenn Youngkin, center-right, terrific conservative, terrific common sense for the Commonwealth. That's not his slogan, that's mine. The Commonwealth of Virginia has been run by Democrats for 8 years. Taxes are up, people are fleeing, jobs are leaving, except in the Virginia suburbs of D.C., where the government grows and grows and grows, and Amazon is coming, and that's good. But the rest of Virginia is struggling because people don't want to live here under a rising tax burden when they can move 10 miles to the south to Tennessee if they're on the border and pay no state income tax. And so when you're competing with a income tax-free state to your south, you're going to lose a lot of people, retirees, et cetera. They're going to Florida and Georgia and North Carolina and Tennessee. Virginia cannot stay in the game if it becomes just a blue state. And it's not a blue state, it's a purple state. And they've lost, the GOP in Virginia has lost 2 consecutive races, not by much, but they've lost. And before that, they won 2 consecutive races. And so Glenn Youngkin can win in this state. He's a common sense conservative. and got management skills and was co-CEO of Carlyle Group, which is an investment firm, and just a very smart guy, terrific traditional Christian member of McLean Bible, a very, lighthouse church in the D.C. suburbs. Just a wonderful guy generally. And so you want to get out there and work for him. If you're in Virginia, you need to go to Glenn Youngkin, just Youngkin for governor, Youngkin for governor, all one word, Youngkin for governor, and sign up and be part of the solution. The FDA has authorized the Pfizer BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine for 12 and higher. That's a big breakthrough. We're going to get this thing on the run. That was said from the White House last night. Thanks to Pfizer and Moderna, thanks to Operation Warp Speed and Donald Trump's administration, the Biden team is not screwing it up. This is good. New U.S. COVID infections fell to the lowest level in 11 months. That is good. The recovery, however, has stumbled as Americans are coping with the Biden inflation. And this is a Washington Post story, second one in 2 days. Recovery stumbles leave Americans confronting unfamiliar inflation risk. President Biden went out and defended unemployment benefits, which are keeping job workers at home, provided, he said, workers accept job offers. I'll play you the tape in a little bit, but I looked over at the Financial Times. I see that iron ore has hit record high for iron ore. As commodities across the world booms, as China reopens, as the United States reopen, we're going to have inflation, and Joe Biden wants to throw $4 trillion and new taxes. It's like Joe Biden wants stagflation. I mean, this is contra the economic guidance of left and right. Larry Summers, don't do this. This is crazy. We've got inflation already. You throw another $4 trillion on the Barbie and we're going to be crazy. Meanwhile, low rates, artificially low rates set by the Fed, led Amazon, a cash-rich company, to borrow $18.5 billion from the private markets yesterday. And by the way, it set records for the lowest margin between what the federal government is offering and a private company. So people now trust Amazon as much as the federal government, almost as much. The full faith and credit of Amazon might become the reserve currency. Amazon, Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook wants to start Libra, a cryptocurrency. I think Amazon should, given this bond issue. But they are so flush with cash, who knows what they're going to do next. John Barry, the author of The Great Influenza, has a new opinion piece out, which I'll share with you later in the hour. We cannot celebrate the end of COVID yet because he's worried about vaccines not working against all variants. And I'll be talking about that later in the show with Neil Ferguson, who authored Doom, The Politics of Catastrophe. It's a terrific book, a wonderful book. I have 17 pages of note for Neil Ferguson. You need to get Doom. U.S. blamed criminal group and colonial pipeline hack. Isn't that good to know? People in Eastern Europe, probably Bulgaria and Russia, took ransomware and seized one of the largest pipelines in the United States. Nightmare. NBC says it won't air the Golden Globes in 2022. That's a loss. Everyone was joking online yesterday. That's because nobody watches the Golden Globes. Pentagon is weighing ending the Jedi Cloud project. This was the one ring to rule them all in the Pentagon. One cloud server, one big company, and they picked Microsoft, and Amazon sued and said that's because Donald Trump doesn't like us. Pentagon figured out whenever you do something this big, if you exclude someone from it, they're going to sue, and they're going to have good grounds, and they're going to end up just chunking it and dividing up the pie per a standard defense contract. The Queen's speech, that's where the Tory government lays out their new specifics. That's coming. And I read through it last night. The thing that jumped out at me, under Boris Johnson's new set of laws, the maximum sentence for a criminal damage to a memorial. They had their own iconoclast rampaging through London as our statues came down last year. The maximum sentence will go from 3 months to 10 years. Meanwhile, one Chinese businessman stood up to Xi Jinping, posted a poem from a millennium ago, the Chinese food delivery app Miaton, and by the end of the day, he took it down for fear of arrest. That's the world that we are competing against. By the way, in Doom by Neil Ferguson, there is a comprehensive review of what China is doing and why we are in a new Cold War. Clarity before agreement, as I told Dennis Prager once, and he shamelessly stole. By the way, neither Prager nor Gorka tell people not to get the vaccine. I checked with them both yesterday. Stay tuned. Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. David M. Drucker is my guest. David is with the Washington Examiner, but he's also on every cable network in America. David, I have a specific question for you. Our friend Joe Concha tweeted this out yesterday. The drop CNN is experiencing is profound in ratings. On Friday, not one program broke 900,000 total viewers. Prime averaged less than 800,000 overall. For comparison, the network averaged 2.74 million viewers in January, so we're talking about more than two-thirds of the audience gone. Now, that is not just Jeff Zucker's problem. I think that's an existential problem for cable news, which is trying increasingly to get 100% of the 3% on either extreme rather than 10% of the 100%. What is going on with television viewing, and what should they do?
I'm not sure, Hugh. I don't know. It's not that it's above my pay grade. I'm just not sure that I have a solution. I think cable news, and look, I began my career and sort of my pre-politics career as an average watcher of cable news as a way to learn about politics and accumulate information about the news. And my own view on cable news, of which I'm happy to appear on, and I do reasonably regularly, and as long as I like the quality of the show, I'd never turn it down. But I think that it has increasingly relied on a business model that needs polarizing politics. So, look, you could look at the last 4 years and realize that Donald Trump is a unique political figure that drew eyeballs. But I also, and you look at January in particular with so many news events, January 5th, January 6th, January 20th, all of the drama surrounding Trump's exit from the White House, that's going to be a major news event. There's going to be a drop. You have to wonder if, in part, the normalcy of the Biden presidency, that's not a comment on the agenda, just the way that he functions, just like a regular normal president, where the debate is about policy and not about attitude. And the fact that he's simply not that polarizing. It doesn't mean that you can't make a case that his agenda isn't radical. You can. Many people would disagree, but many people do agree. But his personality is not polarizing. And so it doesn't create the kind of conflict that is conducive to the polarizing model that cable news relies on. Now, I happen to prefer, as a news consumer and as a political journalist, non-polarizing programming where I can see the kind of debate that I was drawn into on the special report panel on Fox News with the host that Britt Hume hosted and now Brett Baer hosts, that many moons ago Aaron Brown had on a program on CNN that was short-lived, and to me it was short-lived because I'm in the minority and people don't like what I like. That's what I prefer. That's what I would hope works. But I do think part of this is the evolution of viewing. As younger viewers come up, and I see this with my kids who are obsessed with YouTube video programming and not programs, that people are going to consume news on their devices in smaller bites. And so I think this is also sort of a generational change.
But I want to make an argument for content. And my argument for content is that CNN, above all of them, has the least coherent and perhaps least talented news people on in prime time. I mean, Don Lemon's a good guy, but it's just not, there's nothing of substance there. Ditto Cuomo. And people want content. Rachel Maddow is smart. I mean, she's really smart. And so the left-wingers who want some content are going to go to her. But they could do smart television. And I think Tucker's smart, and he's winning. And so I just believe Laura Ingraham is a Supreme Court clerk. She's winning. But now they program for the 100% of the 3% there, too. I think there is an audience for smart television news like Huntley Brinkley, like John Chancellor, like Walter Cronkite. But no one believes that anymore. They think it's got to be whistles and bells and conflict.
Well, I agree with you in this regard. I believe that good content sells. So I feel more confident making this argument when it comes to print or online print, if you will. Whereas I think a lot of the outlets in our industry look at clicks and look at traffic, and I understand why, because you need to make money and it's a business. But I think that it's being overthought. I think you give people smart content with context that they enjoy, that they get something where they're getting something they can't get anywhere else, where they're always coming back to see what you have. And sometimes it can be a little long, and sometimes it can be a little short. But if it's good content that's informative, presented well, and interesting, people will read, and you don't have to sell to the wings on the left or the right with outrage. I feel much more confident saying that about the business that I conduct every day as a writer than as a television pundit.
Yeah, and there's no joy in Mudville, by the way. I am not happy that CNN is crashing. I'm not happy that MSNBC is declining. I want people to have a vigorous free market of ideas. It's just that they built their model on sand, which was Donald Trump. And that's not normal. That was an aberration from the norm to be that conflict oriented and that combative. And they're not going to get that back. And you're right. Online, we go where the quality is. I read the New York Times, I read the Washington Post, I read the Financial Times, and anywhere that's quality, I'd watch the same. But there's no TV left. There really isn't. Drucker, always a pleasure. Follow him on Twitter at David M. Drucker. Follow me to hour 2. Byron York and I will puzzle about the same issues next. Stay tuned, America. Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. It's getting worse in Israel at this hour. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Minutes ago, 40 rockets fired in a massive barrage from Gaza at Ashdod and Ashkelon. I don't know how Israel puts up with this. I'm joined by Byron York of the Washington Examiner and Fox News. Good morning, Byron. How are you?
Good morning, Hugh. Doing well, thanks.
So, cutting through all the other stories for a moment and focusing on Israel, Gaza Strip has erupted in violence, as has Jerusalem. It's been a week of this, and now it's escalating. IDF struck back at 150 targets. It's the sort of thing we haven't seen in a long time, and I fully expect Israel to keep pushing hard. The first instinct of the Biden administration, Jake Sullivan called the Israeli National Security Advisor to say he was concerned. We're back to the Obama playbook.
Absolutely, and I mean Israel knows that. They know what a Democratic administration is going to mean for them, and I think what was extraordinary is what we saw in the Trump administration when to be honest, a lot of people kind of snickered when Trump gave the Mideast portfolio to his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and darned if he did not come up with significant progress by actually kind of reimagining a solution to this problem and having and decentralizing the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and persuading Israel and a number of other countries in the region to reach peace agreements. So we had all this progress, and we had a relatively peaceful period. And so I do think this comes as a surprise to a lot of people, but I'm sure it does not come as a surprise to Israel.
Now, I'm concerned, Byron York, that the Israeli government will feel alone on an island and that the work of the Abraham Accords will go backwards. Is there a countervailing voice? Jake Sullivan is the countervailing voice of reason on the Iran deal, I suspect, and very clear on China's ambitions. But is there an unambiguously pro-Israel voice in the White House that you know of that says, look, Trump did it pretty well by ignoring the Palestinians because they wouldn't come to the table. Let's do that, more of that.
I think there are two problems with that. First of all, the answer to your question is I don't know. Do you?
No, I don't.
Okay, I don't either. So the two problems is it would conflict with a lot of a history of democratic policy toward Israel, and two, it would suggest that Trump had done something right, which is just not possible inside the White House, inside the Democratic Party. If Trump did it, it was wrong, and we need to change it. So this is one of these areas, like China, and they're going to come around to some parts of immigration, that Trump was doing the right thing, and they're going to have to find a way to keep some of his policies, even as they say they're doing something completely different.
All right, now I want to turn to television because while you work for Fox, you study everything. Joe Concha, our friend, put a tweet up yesterday. The drop CNN is experiencing ratings is profound. On Friday, not one program on CNN broke 900,000 total viewers. I remind people I have 6 million a week listeners. So it's really small. Prime averaged less than 800,000 people overall. For comparison, the network averaged 2.74 million viewers in January. So we're talking about more than two-thirds of the audience gone. What is happening there, Byron York?
It was all about Trump. I mean, their surge was all about Trump, and it didn't end with the election. That was the whole because of the way Trump contested the election and how angry all of that time became. They did even better. Now, I am a Fox News contributor, and I looked at these ratings in which CNN was doing very well. Fox was not doing as well. It was a complete change from the way it had been the year before. And I was concerned, but I thought, let's just wait. There's going to be a Democratic president. This period is going to calm down, and the law of gravity will reassert itself. And boy, has it. I think one of the things Joe was looking at is you look at the daily ratings of all the cable news programs. And now, as it was in the past, you look at the top 10, 8 of them are Fox. There are a couple of MSNBC programs. The highest CNN-rated program, the highest, is about 25th. And so that's kind of the way it used to be. And so the CNN surge, which, as you know, you follow Brian Stelter and others that were really crowing about as if something huge and permanent had happened. The CNN surge was just all about Trump. It always was. It was about anger at Trump. It did get people to watch CNN for a little bit, and now they're gone.
Now, Jeff Zucker is a very smart guy, and I like him. And I work with CNN. I'm an NBC News contributor like you're a Fox News contributor, so people have to account. We're not trashing a fellow network. We're just reporting on a story, and we both know something about it. Here's the deal. If you were running a Tom Brady quarterback store in Boston, downtown Boston, you had a store devoted to selling Tom Brady merchandise, and all you sold was Tom Brady merchandise. And then Tom Brady goes to Tampa Bay. I mean, just leaves. Do you keep selling Tom Brady New England Patriot merchandise, or do you change? And I don't think they understand that, Byron, because they're not changing.
Well, I did have to wonder. I wondered at various times. Obviously, CNN went, full resistance, as did MSNBC. And you can have an opinion of who did resistance better, but that's what they did. But CNN has had poor ratings, except for this period that we're talking about, which they did well. They've had poor ratings for quite a while. And you think to yourself, well, why? Is that okay with them? I mean, because Fox News, they work very hard to win. And in my view, I'm a Fox News contributor, they do the absolute best news programming, and that's why they win. So I was thinking about CNN, and I thought, well, are ratings the most important thing to them? CNN does make a good deal of money from cable carriage fees. They did have, I think it's gone now, they had their airport thing. They had a lot of international money, and I thought, well, just maybe actually winning ratings in the United States are not that big a deal to them, and it's better for them. It's more valuable for them to feel good about themselves and lead the resistance than to actually win. I can't really say. I don't know.
I've never known a news story. I've been in news for 31 years in every network, in every form, and I've never known anyone who's indifferent to circulation or ratings. You can't be and stay in the business. So the question becomes, will they shift their model? Right now, MSNBC looks for 100% of the 3% on the left. Fox looks for 100% of the 3% on the right, though I agree with you, Special Report is the best program on television. Is there room for someone who looks for 10% of the 100%, which is what I say this show is? I want 10% of the 100% of the radio audience. I don't want 100% of the 3% on the right. Do you think there is room for a cable network that would do that? Look to be fair and center right, center left, and fair.
Well, yes. I mean, but part of it depends on doing better TV. I mean, the reason, obviously I'm a Fox News contributor. One of the reasons they do well is that they do TV better than the other networks.
That's true. I mean, Special Report is the best show on television, bar none. I just think that's a given.
It is. And it's so is there room for CNN to do better? Of course there is. Will they do it? I don't know. It would take, and they're going to have a change in leadership some point by the end of the year, aren't they?
Yeah, Jeff is retiring. Yeah.
Yeah, so they will probably try. See something different. The question is, when you have the change in leadership, are you going to see like the set change, or are you going to see something really substantive change?
Do you follow football, Byron? Do you follow football at all?
Not enough.
All right. Well, I'll tell you, the Browns took it down to the studs 4 years ago. I mean, everybody was gone. And they rebuilt the team, and now they're contending for the Super Bowl, because sometimes you got to take it down to the studs. I've never seen a network do that. I think CNN might have to do that. Last 30 seconds to you.
Well, I worked in television for several years, and there were always news directors who a new news director would come in, and it would be an absolute bloodbath. They'd just fire everybody. And then others would try to do it more surgically. I'm in the do it more surgically camp, because there are some people that viewers like on CNN, but they've got an enormous problem, and it's not going to be solved by just a little tinkering.
Huge problem. Thank you, Byron. Stay tuned, America. I'm joined by Admiral James Stavridis, retired United States Navy, former Allied Supreme Commander of NATO, former head of Southern Command. Good morning, Admiral. I love it when you have on your blue jacket. I think that's your lucky jacket. Admiral, I'm guessing you know Neil Ferguson, whose brand new book, Doom, is the subject of my long interview today, and it will be on the podcast. Have you read his previous books?
I have. I have almost a complete collection. I think he's brilliant. He's a good friend. We get together 2 or 3 times a year. He's one of the foremost economic and geoeconomic thinkers we have today.
Well, Neil has written a new book called Doom, The Politics of Catastrophe, and I'm going to spend one of my hour-long conversations with him later after the show, at the end of the show and into the show. But I read it, and I think it's a significant book. I think it will be read for years to come. And I want to read to you one paragraph because it sums up our problem, and it's particularly apropos to you because you are a warrior, a diplomat, a teacher, and an academic, and therefore this applies to you. Neil writes, I have argued that this new Cold War with China is both inevitable and desirable. At a July conference on the world order after COVID-19, organized by the Kissinger Center for Global Affairs at Johns Hopkins University, a clear majority of speakers warned of the perils of a new Cold War. Eric Schmidt, the former chairman of Google, argued instead for a rivalry partnership model of cooperation. Graham Allison agreed, that's the academic from Harvard. The last Cold War had cast a shadow over the global Holocaust for decades, observed James Steinberg, former Deputy Secretary of State. The Hoover Institution's Elizabeth Economy had an answer. The United States and China could partner. Tom Wright of the Booking Institution said, focusing only on power competition while ignoring the needs for cooperation will not give the United States an enduring strategic advantage. He went on to say, look, academics are doves, but that's all one-sided. Where do you come down on the clarity before agreement, Neil Ferguson point of view, and all these Eric Schmidt doesn't surprise me, but are we going to get anyone thinking about what it means to be in what we really are, a new Cold War?
I think we will inevitably be in a Cold War. And I kind of align myself with Henry Kissinger on this one, who just before pandemic time, so year and change ago, said, we're in the foothills of a Cold War, and we're ascending that mountain, in my view. And of course, you're talking to a guy who has written a novel, 2034, that postulates the potential for a real war, not a Cold War, a hot war with China in 13 years. So unfortunately, I wish I could say, yes, we can find our way into a cooperative model with China, but I just don't think that's how it comes out. So I stand on this one with Henry Kissinger. I haven't read Neil's book yet. It's on my front table. Neil and I were just emailing about it yesterday, so I will dive into it. But I suspect I'm going to find myself over in that end of the camp, which says the following. We've got to confront China. We've got issues that require confrontation. We cannot simply say to China, hey, you now own the South China Sea, a vast body of water, half the size of the United States, because we just don't want to get in a confrontation with you. We're going to have to confront them on that. We're going to have to confront them on human rights. They're putting millions, it looks like hundreds of thousands, certainly, of Uyghurs, Muslims, into what look to my eye like concentration camps, etc. So it would be nice to say, well, we can work all this out, but I don't think so. We're going to have to confront China. We're going to have to bend that relationship, Hugh. We don't want to break it and end up in a hot war, but I think we can find a middle passage there.
It's interesting. I'm going to ask Neil, and maybe you already know the answer to this, if he's read 2034, because I think it's kind of the fictional backdrop. Yeah, so he's read it. In the book, he makes it clear that he believes, he quotes the Kissinger foothills quote. He said, we're now into the dark forested part of the foothills. We're into it, and we're not getting out of it. The question is, though, the academic slant. You ran the Fletcher School for Diplomacy at Tufts for a number of years. The Naval Institute chairman. You might still be chairman of the Naval Institute. I'm not sure. And so you know academics. Academics are like aircraft carriers, right? They don't change very quickly. But I don't think, and I don't think the media is particularly nimble on this stuff. They're used to Trump bad, everybody else good, and Neil is actually fairly complimentary of Trump's China policy for confronting what you just said, the obvious externalities from China that impinge on us. Will the academic community catch up here anytime soon?
I think they will, particularly in the tranche of the academic world that looks at security issues, that looks at geopolitics. And I'll give you a very practical example from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. Our absolutely leading security studies professors, Dr. Bob Falscraft, Dr. Dick Schultz, Colonel retired Abby Linnington. These are people who are, I don't want to say hawks, but they have a very clear-eyed view of where this is all going. And by the way, I'll be doing a book talk, 2034, for the Fletcher School and Tufts University this afternoon. So I will pose this exact question to them because I think it is a good one. And then on Neil Ferguson, you should ask him about what was the one big thing Stavridis gets wrong in the book 2034. And I'll preview the answer. Just no one should ask a question as a journalist unless they have a pretty good idea what the answer is. The answer is he thinks I got the date wrong, that it will come much sooner, to his comment in the book, evidently, about we're now in the darkly forested parts. He wrote a column about all of this, the coming challenges with China, and the punchline of the column at the bottom is Admiral Stavridis has written a superb book about all this, but he gets one big thing wrong, the date.
The date. Now, what's interesting, I have 17 pages of notes. You know how I do a book interview. And I have 17 pages of notes. And so it's an absolutely engrossing book. However, he spends a lot of time talking about the sudden disintegration of empire. It happened to Russia in 1917. It happened to the Soviet Union in 1989. It happened to the Brits after World War II. It's happened through history. And he suggests frailty in networks that we do not see until it's upon us. Do you think the United States is there?
I think we are in a position where if we don't kind of pop on the light and think coherently about what could happen, we'll end up as in 2034, no allies, as this book unfolds, no allies for the United States, behind China in technological ways, notably in cyber, in a very divided country where our political parties have fragmented. That's not where we want to be 15 years from now, but we could end up there. What we have to do to avoid it is address these divisions in our society. That's a domestic political conversation that you do very well on this show. But from my wheelhouse, we've got to maintain at least parity with China in things like artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, machine learning, STEM education. So yeah, we have real challenges. I think those are some of the networks and fragilities that Neil is talking about. And I can't wait to read the book, and then we can have a more fulsome conversation.
What's interesting to me is whether or not we will get out of this Congress the Shipyard Act. Now, it was introduced in a bipartisan way, both our R&D in the Senate, R&D in the House. $35 billion to repair Navy and commercial shipyards. It should be higher, but at least it's a start. What would you make of that passing? Do you think that would show some seriousness? We're kind of where England was in 1932. Are you going to get serious or not? They didn't, and they almost lost it all as a result.
Yeah, and I think we can be lulled a bit here in the United States by our history in that December 7th comes, 1941, Pearl Harbor ensues. The fleet is crushed in Pearl Harbor, yet 4 years later, we have 7,000 ships in the United States Navy, 4 years later. So we tend to have this mental model that says, oh, we have this massive industrial base. If we ever need to really ramp up, we could do it. A newsflash, in the world of shipbuilding, ship repair, no, we don't have that. Disclosure, I'm on the board of a shipyard on the West Coast. So I know this space well, but I am going to say, even parking that affiliation, yeah, we need to get serious about shipbuilding because China today, as you know, Hugh, has more warships than the United States of America, and the trajectory as they construct them makes them look like the United States of 1941, an industrial base that can crank them out. I would say $35 billion is a down payment on what we need to be doing in terms of that.
Don't park that affiliation, Admiral. Don't park that affiliation. Instead, use it for the benefit of the audience. If they drop $2 billion on your shipyard, what would you do with it? What would a shipyard do with that kind of money?
We'd hire more talented people. We would construct better facilities. Let's face it, what's more infrastructure than shipyards? So we would build better graving facilities, better dry docks. We would have more technology built into our repair systems, would have a continuity of employment that would bring apprentices in, hold them, train them, keep them, retain them. One of the problems with the shipyard industry is it becomes episodic because the Navy goes on a building stage and then kind of stops for a few years. What happens to that high pressure welder? Well, she's going to go down to work at a refinery in Houston. You'll never get her back. And so all of those things, we could level that out in talk about critical infrastructure for the United States of America. Again, I'm a retired admiral. I'm on the board of a shipyard. So I come at this with a particular viewpoint, but I think I can make those arguments coherently with anybody.
And what about endowing the shipyards? Because I've talked to Mike Gallagher about this, Congressman on Armed Services. Just don't throw the money at it and mandate the spending. Endow their ongoing infrastructure ramp up. Because if you give people, you know how this works, if you give people $100 million and say spend it this fiscal year, out the door it goes in bonuses. And you don't need that. You need a steady income stream you can count on for 10 years.
No, that's exactly right. And we know how to do this. We do this in other industries. And we need to, and I know you'll agree with this, we don't want to have a state takeover of the shipyard industry, broadly speaking. But there's a private-public aspect to this where we can feather in our Navy shipyards. We have Navy shipyards that are run by the government. And then we also have private shipyards, like the one on whose board I serve. And then we have yards that build ships and repair them. And we have some yards that just do repairs. So it's a very broad industry. It's a complicated issue, but I'm not sure I'd want to use the word endowment, which kind of implies parking money in an account and giving someone the interest from it. But I think what you mean is having a level set across the income streams, across the income. And yes, we can do that.
Actually, I meant endowment, but we'll talk about it another time, Admiral, because I've used that model in the private sector so that you can maintain in health and human services spending, you can maintain a steady income. But we'll talk about that another time. 2034, Neil Ferguson, he'll give me his punchline again today. Thank you, Admiral. I'll see you again soon. Stavridis, enjoy your book talk at the Fletcher School this afternoon. Come back next week. I love talking to him about this stuff. America, it's Hugh Hewitt. I'm so pleased to welcome back the GOP nominee. He won yesterday for governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia, Glenn Youngkin. Congratulations, Glenn's got to feel good this morning to be the winner.
Hugh, thank you for having me back. And there's a bright, sunny day in Virginia today. We're going to work to go win in November right now.
Now, that is what I wanted to hear. Some people take vacations after they win, and that's not what voters want to see. They want to see people out there working hard. What's the plan? Because Terry McAuliffe was attacking you before the sun had set yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, before the sun had set and probably before the votes were counted, because he knew he didn't want to run against me. And it's amazing. I'm going to talk about bringing people together, and what does Terry want to do? Divide us. He's from a political dynasty, Hugh, and you know this, and they have one plan, which is to divide people. They've been doing it since Hillary Clinton, and it's all he knows, and he comes out with a machete, and you know what I'm talking about? I'm talking about a new day in Virginia with more jobs than people can take, maintaining our right to work status. Terry wants to undo that. I'm talking about schools that teach our kids how to learn, and Terry wants to undo that and teach them what to learn. I'm talking about having the best law enforcement in the country by investing in it and protecting qualified immunity, and Terry wants to get rid of it. He is all about division, and that's why Virginians are tired of it. And that's why there is a groundswell of support from Republicans, independents, and even Democrats to put an end to the McAuliffe-Northam political dynasty. And let's call this a new day in Virginia big time.
Yeah, common sense for the Commonwealth is what I tell people. And I'm a Virginian, and so everyone's going to have to endure a lot of focus from me on this race. But it is a national race. People are going to watch it. I do want people to understand Terry's been doing Terry for 20 years. I think 20 years ago on my show, he said this, Glenn Youngkin. So I'm glad to have his endorsement. I'm using that endorsement to endorse you, Glenn. I love that. Terry used to, he's a fine, hale fellow, well-met, who has never met a tax he didn't want to raise or money he didn't want to spend or people he did not want to subject to Terry McAuliffe tactics. I mean, this goes back to 1992. He's been doing this, Glenn. He's got a pretty good skill set when it comes to defaming people.
He does, but Hugh, this is why I got into this race. This is why I quit my job last summer, is there is a different way to do this. And we ran a differentiated kind of campaign during the nomination. We were talking about the future, how we're going to fix things, how a 30-year business career actually translates and how to get things done, as opposed to looking backward and literally trying to divide everybody up into buckets and then take your group and make it bigger than everybody else. I mean, it is just the antithesis of what Virginians want to talk about. And every place I stopped, whether it was, a 7-person pancake breakfast in Virginia Beach, Virginia, or 850 people in Chesterfield County, I heard the exact same thing over and over again, which is, Glenn, we're tired of it. We want something totally different. You're an outsider. You know how to get things done. We're for you. Please do not let the Commonwealth stay in the hands of this political dynasty of Terry McAuliffe. And Hugh, this is an overwhelming movement, and I am just so encouraged. I'm humbled. I am so ready to serve. I am prepared to win, and I cannot wait to get to work as soon as you and I finish this radio call and get moving and go and talking to voters today.
And people can sign up to be a part of that at youngkinforgovernor.com. Now, last question, Glenn, before you go. In Northern Virginia, it's very blue. When Ohio flipped from blue to red, it's because first Kasich and then Mike DeWine and Rob Portman, they went to Cleveland, to Cuyahoga County, where it was deep blue, and they took votes away. So that means Arlington, Alexandria, Loudoun, that means the northern tier of deep blue. How are you going to campaign in those counties where it's just a deep blue, icy forest of Democrats?
Well, Hugh, it isn't quite that icy in my experience. And what's happening is, of course, we have a very, very large minority population. It's actually the majority. And Republicans have done a terrible job of engaging with these folks that have conservative values. You know what, Hugh, they want a robust economy with low taxes and low regulations. They want their school systems to work for them as opposed to be closed to them. They absolutely want law enforcement that's invested in and empowered to keep our communities safe. They absolutely embrace religious freedom and our constitutional rights. Wait a minute, these are Republican values. And the Republicans just haven't spent time engaging in these communities. And I started in February, and we are already building coalitions. We're bringing folks on board, and this is part of our wave. And this is why we are going to win in November and not run the same kind of Republican gubernatorial campaign that's been run for the last 10 years and resulted in a loss. We're absolutely engaging in these communities big time and recognizing that these shared values that are far more than some kind of political party nomenclature, these are shared values for all Virginians. And that's why we're going to get this done in November. And again, that's why people are not buying what Terry McAuliffe and his political dynasty are selling, which is actually big government, high taxes, high regulations, bad school philosophy, tear down our police, divide people as opposed to unite us. And it is not going to work this time. And I cannot wait to go serve Virginia.
Glenn Youngkin, congratulations on a big win yesterday. Youngkin for governor. Go there, America. Get involved. Youngkin, YOUNGKINFOR, governor.com. I'll talk to him early and often. Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt, inside the Beltway, joined by Dr. Roger Marshall, who is also a United States Senator. Roger Marshall from the great state of Kansas. Good morning, Senator Dr. Marshall. How are you?
Good morning, Hugh. That's some great uplifting music. I appreciate that early in the morning.
That's good. Now, I'm glad you joined us because you helped make a PSA of the Republican doctors in Congress advocating for the vaccine. And yesterday I did the entire show asking people why they didn't get vaccinated yet if they hadn't. I've got a list of objections, but first tell me why you participated in that project.
Well, look, I saw, 2 months ago, there was a large amount of vaccine hesitancy in people. And we've done some research, and I'll be curious what your questions are from your listeners. But bottom line is I wanted to reach out to those folks. I want to get to herd immunity. I want to be able to throw our mask away so we can live as free as we did before. And bottom line messaging is this. If you haven't got your vaccine yet, please talk to your doctor, talk to your doctor's nurse, talk to your local pharmacist. There's nobody in D.C. that's going to convince you one way or the other. And it's not a matter of, we shouldn't talk down to people. I respect where you're coming from. My goodness, we've all been talked down to and just shamed, backed into a corner. We've been lied to, deceived, and I get it. But I just encourage people to talk to their local doctor, maybe their doctor's nurse. That's the bottom line. I want to live life as free as I can. I want my grandchildren to be protected, but obviously they're not eligible for a vaccine yet. So I just want to get back to normal.
So, Senator Dr. Marshall, let me run through the response that I got. Greg in Ventura said, I'm 17 years old. I'm 72 years old, and I haven't been sick a day in my life, so I'm not getting the vaccine. How do you respond to that?
Well, I respect exactly where you're coming from. I just want to make sure he talks to his doctor about the same situation, and he's still at risk because of his age. But the fact that he's healthy is a really good thing. But if he would get this virus, I don't know, there's a 5-10% chance he could die from it. But beyond that, really, that's the decision between him and his doctor.
All right, Tim in Phoenix said, first of all, Dennis Prager told me not to get it. I checked with Dennis. That's not true. But then he said, I've already had COVID, and so I don't need it.
Well, I think that's a great point and a great question. And I wish the CDC would give us a little bit more guidance on that. I really would not even try to argue against that. I would encourage him to get it. But of all the people that have the best argument not to get it, it's him. I wish I had a test that could prove, what your antibodies are. I don't even know where to go with that one, but I would just have him. How old is that person, do you think?
I can't remember how old Tim was, but both my producer and my friend Kurt Schleicher have had the virus, and they both got advised to get the vaccine, and they both did, because it makes you a superhero.
Yeah, well, the older person needs to get the virus. The younger person the older person that's had the virus, I still think needs the vaccine. I think the younger person, they've got a really good argument.
Okay,
Don't tell
Randy
Dr. Fauci, though.
I won't. Randy in Knoxville. Being reasonable about this matters. Randy in
Yeah.
Knoxville said both Dennis Prager and Seb Gorka told him to get it, and Seb also told me that's not true. So there's a lot of misinformation, but he said that it's still classified as an experimental, and J&J used aborted fetuses to produce the vaccine. I told him that's not the position of the Catholic Church, but nevertheless, what about the still being classified as experimental?
Well, again, it's a great point. We've given it to millions of people, hundreds of millions of people, minimal serious reactions to it. Certainly the risk of getting sick, being in an ICU, going to, dying from this are greater than any type of risk that we know from getting the vaccination itself. We're not brand new at the vaccine games. I don't know, probably 100 years experience of giving vaccines. Not quite, I guess, but over 50 years experience with vaccines. They've saved millions of lives. And then again, I just encourage them to talk to their doctor or their pharmacist about it.
Now, Amy called. She says, I'm 40 years old and I'm still childbearing age. I might have a baby again. And although it has been approved for an emergency, it's not fully approved. We don't know what it'll do to pregnant women. You are an obstetrician. Would you advise your pregnant patients to get the vaccine?
Okay. If they're pregnant, no. And I think that really, again, they better talk to their obstetrician about it and their risk factor. If you were a diabetic that's pregnant in your second or third trimester, I'm more inclined to do it. But really, I hate to get out over my skis. It's not black or white. I think that's really a decision between that pregnant patient and their doctor. And it is not black or white, that's for sure.
How about people who are not pregnant but of childbearing age who are not pregnant?
Yeah, I really cannot find anything that science would support there's a concern about that. So I think, especially if you're high risk, if you've got type 2 diabetes, you've got blood pressure problems, you've had a stroke before, some of those things, you better go get the vaccine regardless. The younger you are, the healthier you are, I can sure respect where you're coming from. But I'm not seeing any science evidence out there that it has any harm on future fertility.
Okay, Sally in Atlanta says there's a greater risk of getting sick or dying from getting the vaccine than staying unvaccinated, and she's taking anyway ivermectin, which is very effective in preventing the disease.
Well, I don't think that's true. I think that the chances of getting sick and dying from the virus are much higher than getting sick or having any complication from the vaccine. I just think that's not true. Sorry.
All right. Last one I'm going to throw at you, Dr. Senator Roger Marshall. Chris said, look, SARS, MERS, Ebola, they all took at least 5 years to get a vaccine, but this one we can get in 11 months. That's fishy.
Yeah, well, salute President Trump. He just didn't take no for an answer. But also we didn't skip any steps. I think that's what's important. I think that the fact that we were able to front the money up front, and they had a guaranteed, population at the end of it. These labs were able to do multiple testing at the same time, several different parallel roads at the same time. And the fact that the incidence of the virus was so frequent, we had a great control group right away to see how the effectiveness of the vaccine. So we were just fortunate. And I do think over the last year we've had some incredible technology improvement as far as RNA viruses go and able to figure those out as well. So there was some new technology here applying old techniques. The Doc Caucus up here in Congress, we followed this monthly, sat down with the FDA, the CDC, made sure they weren't skipping any steps. I think it's safe. I think it's very, very effective. And bottom line is, if you haven't got the vaccine yet, please go talk to your doctor or your pharmacist about it.
Last comment, Doctor. 1 and 2 of our callers raised a political issue, not a scientific issue. But I'd like you to comment on it. They said Kamala Harris was against the vaccine in the summer. Now she's for the vaccine. Why should we believe anybody? And this also goes to everybody else who's had position A and then became position not A. There has been a lot of change of positions, and that has hurt the authority of elected officials and public health officials generally, as my later guest, Neil Ferguson, argues in his new book, Doom, The Politics of Disaster. We really have been failed by the CDC, the FDA, and by politics and by media. How do we overcome that?
Yeah, I'm not even going to try to disagree or tell your caller anything differently. My dad would say that's hypocritical, and my dad could not tolerate hypocrites. Okay, so I disagree with your what your caller said right there. They're spot on, and that's why I know that nobody in D.C. has any credibility left when it comes to this virus. And by the way, we still have not got to the truth of where this virus came from. So here we are.
Well, Senator, that was a great run through. I appreciate the Doctors Caucus. I think it's one of the best PSAs. I'm going to play another one by Joni Benoit and Dewan Eubanks now. But thank you, Senator. I'll see you soon. Yeah. Keep coming back and keep telling people to get vaccinated.
All right, Hugh. Keep up spreading the gospel. Thanks so much.
Will do. This isn't the gospel, but it's close. It's gospel truth is what I like to say. You should get vaccinated. Welcome back, America. 33 minutes after the hour, joined by former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. Good morning, Governor. It's always good to talk to you.
Great to talk to you, Hugh. Good morning.
Good morning. Now, you're younger than I am. I got married in 1982. You got married in 86 to marry Pat. But I bought my first house in 1985, and the interest rate was 12.5%. I don't know when you and Mary Pat bought your first house, but was it during the inflation years? Did you have to pay some ridiculous amount of money for it?
We bought our first house, Hugh, in 1989, and so we weren't paying quite as high as you were in '85, but we still were paying interest rates that people now would blanch at.
Well, I bring it up because I've started to use the hashtag Biden inflation. I don't think most Americans know what inflation does to people. Do you?
I do, and lived through that. Remember, as you did, I lived through those Jimmy Carter years when inflation was double digit, and and he came up with what he called the misery index to try to hit Jerry Ford back in the 70s on that combination of inflation and unemployment. And the misery index became epic under Jimmy Carter, and inflation just eats away. You're working hard every day, and it's like you're going on a treadmill that you're falling off of. That's what inflation really is like. You keep running harder, but the treadmill keeps going even faster, and you keep falling off the back of it.
Now, do you think there's any chance that President Biden will reassess the request for $4 trillion more? That's like throwing fuel on a barbecue. It's crazy.
I don't think he'll reassess it, but he may be forced to not get what he wants if folks like Joe Manchin and others say to him, this is ridiculous. And when you look at the amount of money that the Fed is putting into this economy and continues to, and you add to it that level of spending, there's no question in my mind we're going to see inflation. And that is crippling, especially to young people who are trying to buy a new home, who are trying to move ahead in life, buy a car, buy a home, get some things in their lives that help them move up the ladder. Inflation will be crippling. You're right. Most people don't know about it because since Ronald Reagan, we've had it relatively under control. But that doesn't mean it's a forever thing. And Joe Biden is driving us to that.
Governor Christie, I have coming up after you, Neil Ferguson, the historian with few equals out there, has written a new book, Doom, The Politics of Catastrophe, which is a must-read. He began his career on the VMER inflation, and people really don't know. When it takes off, it takes off. It kills people, especially seniors.
Oh, listen, there's no question. It's a very good point. It's people at both ends of the age spectrum, right? It's those who are just starting their career and haven't yet gotten going on in terms of driving their own ability to make more money. And then it's seniors who are on a fixed income, who have saved a certain amount of money for their retirement or are living purely off Social Security and have no way for inflation to keep up with, or their income rather to keep up with inflation. It is a crippling thing, and I urge anybody who doubts it to go back and look at some of those news reports from the late 1970s to see what it was like under Jimmy Carter and how people couldn't afford the basics of groceries and other things that they needed because their salary was being eaten alive by inflation.
Now, I want to switch over to a political story. I had Glenn Youngkin on earlier. I endorsed Glenn Youngkin throughout the Virginia campaign because I'm a Virginian. We need common sense conservatism in this state. He is running against a red governor. That is, he's got term limit out, Ralph Northam, but Terry McAuliffe is coming back. It reminds me so much of your 2009 race, the first year of a Democratic president. You ran against John Corzine, who's a really rich guy who's an incumbent with the machine behind him. What's your advice to Youngkin on beating an entrenched Democratic machine in a blue state, and Virginia is a blue state now with an incumbent Democratic president? What do you do?
You first have to disqualify the Democrat as an acceptable alternative based upon their record and the circumstances of what's going on in the country. Now, remember, I was in much worse shape than Glenn would be in his race because Barack Obama had just won a big victory in 2008 over John McCain, and it was being argued that the Democratic Party under Obama had now changed the politics of the country completely. And when the election happened, Barack Obama came in the last weekend and was significantly more popular than Joe Biden is now or ever will be, I suspect. So you have to go right. You have to forget about the national politics. Go right after the Democrat as an unacceptable alternative. Put down to the mind of the voter, and then you stand up as the reasonable, sensible, right of center alternative.
That's interesting. Now, I know Terry McAuliffe, and you probably do as well. In fact, Terry used to
do.
come on this show. I want to play for you a clip of Terry when he was on this show a few years back when he was just being Terry. Here's Terry McAuliffe. Now, Terry McAuliffe did stuff like that forever. He's a Paul.
Yep.
He's also very rich, and he's very Clinton-esque. How do you beat Terry specifically?
Well, look, it's going to depend on what kind of race Terry runs. Right now, is Terry going to stay the Terry that we know? If he is, he's harder to beat. But I suspect that Terry, because he's got a primary as well, is going to have to move towards the left the way this party is moving towards the left because of the challengers he has. And when he does that, that's going to give you the opening to be able to beat him.
Interesting. What about this? In Virginia, the schools have gone nuts. They've actually publicly said there will be no more advanced classes for math for anyone not in the 11th grade or the 12th grade. It's crazy. You ran against the schools. You think Youngkin should run against the school bureaucracy as well?
It is the single most important issue in this country right now, and Republicans are not spending enough time talking about it. The teachers union has taken over the White House. They've taken over the White House. Jill Biden has said that Randi Weingarten will always have a seat at the table, and she'll make sure of it. And when you look at what Joe Biden has done, breaking his promise to have all children back in the classroom within 100 days of his presidency, he's not even guaranteeing they'll all be back in the classroom next September. This is about the comfort of adults and not about the challenges of children. And they are ruining child education. Hugh, from kindergarten on up, we are not going to understand the ramifications of what's happened by not reopening all the classrooms last September because the teachers union doesn't want their members to go back to work because they're trying to justify their own $1 million plus salaries with benefits.
I happen to have a clip of Randi Weingarten, who was on Fox with Martha McCallum yesterday, cut number 15 for Governor Christie.
But that's why you have to still have some mitigation because it's only emergency use vaccination right now. But I would hope that Fox would do what everybody else in public health is doing, which is we have to get our kids vaccinated. Once the vaccination is okay, I would hope Fox says to all these people that don't want the vaccines, that think there's a problem, why don't you and I do things together to get our kids back to school? This is what we need to do. We have to stop the misinformation. We have to stop the disinformation.
So there you hear Randi Weingarten attacking Fox and moving the goal line to all kids being vaccinated, Governor Christie.
Yeah, of course, but there's no scientific evidence that supports the idea that kids need to be vaccinated in order for classrooms to be safe. In fact, the science is the exact opposite. Now, parents can make their own decisions about whether they want their children to be vaccinated based upon the public health information, and they should make those decisions. But it should have nothing to do with whether they're going to go back to school or not, because we've seen the studies, huge public health studies. And by the way, the CDC was about to say this until the AFT, the American Federation of Teachers, and Randi Weingarten became their thought partner at the instruction of the White House. And then all of a sudden, it wasn't safe to go back to school. We've seen studies of 90,000 plus students and teachers in North Carolina that showed you were much more likely, 12 times more likely, to catch COVID outside the school building than you were inside the school building. She's moving the goalposts because she wants to go back to her members and say, see, I got you out of having to be in the classroom for another year. That's what she's looking to do, Hugh, and that's what moving the goalposts on children's vaccination is, because she'll want it to go all the way down to kindergartners at 5 and 6 years old.
All right, now, Governor, I got to move to a difficult subject because you're a U.S. attorney, former U.S. attorney. Rudy Giuliani is your friend, former U.S. attorney. But the current U.S. attorney has gone and raided his home and his office. How much trouble is Rudy Giuliani in?
Well, look, the answer is we don't know. But what I would say is this. It is a very high bar, usually, to get a search warrant for an attorney's home, an attorney of any kind, an attorney's home and office. And certainly, I think a former attorney for the President of the United States, former President of the United States, it would be even a higher bar. So that raises concerns. But I hope what we have here is not something where Rudy's going to be in big trouble, because he is a friend of mine and someone who I have great respect for over the years. And I hope that no one will jump to conclusions about it. We have to see what the evidence is. But I will admit, Hugh, that it was something that I very, very rarely did, I think once or twice during my 7 years as U.S. attorney, because you have to have such respect for the attorney-client privilege and protecting those secrets.
Now, given that he is the former president's attorney, do you think Donald Trump is out of the woods with the United States Southern District of New York, which everyone knows from billionaires and every other, crime show ever?
Well, we call them, inside the Justice Department when I was there, we used to call them the Sovereign District of New York, Hugh, because they thought they were above everybody else at the Justice Department. So I would say no one should jump to any conclusions about anything that the Southern District of New York may or may not do, and what the evidence may or may not show over time. So, no, I don't think anybody should jump to any conclusions on that either way. You shouldn't say that former President Trump's out of the woods or that he's guilty of anything. This is the way our justice system works, and hopefully there are not going to be leaks that indicate one thing or another, because that's just wrong, because you hurt the reputations of people who are public figures in a way that you should never put that toothpaste back in the tube.
With ongoing investigation, last question, Governor Christie, what is your advice to Rudy and to former President Trump about appearing on television in any circumstance to be asked any questions?
I would avoid it. If I were their lawyer, I would tell all of them to keep quiet and not do anything that can help the government make a case against you. And that's just the basics of criminal defense law. And it's more difficult for public figures like Mayor Giuliani or President Trump. But first and foremost, if I were their lawyer, and that's the basis you're asking me the question, I would tell them my job first and foremost is to prevent you from ever being charged with anything. And to do that, the best way to do that is to keep quiet, go out to dinner, go play some golf, and stay off of TV.
Have you told President Trump that yet?
I have not, because I'm not his lawyer, so I don't want to presume to be his lawyer. If I was his lawyer, though, that's exactly what I would tell him, Hugh. But knowing the president, as I do for 20 years, I doubt he'd listen.
So, Governor Christie, always good to talk to you. Thank you, Governor. Hope Glenn Youngkin listened to that interview as well. I will talk to you again soon.